out down the Gold Coast. Still better than a good day in Brisbane.
Certainly nicer than Brisbane, yeah.
It was raining heavier down there.
It was awful.
Are you ready?
You ready? Excellent. Well, in a few weeks' time, this fantastic new Seaway Promenade will be open for visitors, and it's my great pleasure to get a chance to check it out today. Doesn't it look fantastic? This is part of the current $6.84 million investment in the Spit here, of course, all stepping us towards that Spit master plan. And who could forget that it was our government that stepped in to save the Spit from the kinds of inappropriate developments that had been discussed at the time, and now you can see our vision coming together, the community's vision coming together for the Spit to stay a place where families can come and spend their weekends, where visitors can come and check out the beautiful Gold Coast. The viewing platform at the end of the seawall will be one of the most Instagrammed places in the Gold Coast in Queensland, and will really ensure that people right around the world get to see just how beautiful the Gold Coast is. The views from there over to the city and the skyline, as well as, of course, South Stradbroke Island, will be very, very popular, as will coming here to see the sunset and enjoy the sunset. Investing in destinations like this is a crucial part of continuing to attract visitors and to support our tourism industry, and that's why we continue to do it. But right now, of course, many in our tourism industry here on the Gold Coast, and indeed right throughout the state continue to struggle with the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and many of them are suffering from sleepless nights right now, worrying how they're going to sustain their businesses, how they're going to keep their workers in the face of the end of JobKeeper. And so it is time now for the federal government to outline just exactly how they will continue to support Queensland's tourism industry as it struggles to recover from this long period of no international tourists. The Queensland government continues to support our tourism industry. In fact, our Queensland.com campaign has been incredibly successful at attracting domestic tourists to prop up the tourism industry. It's not going to be possible to fully replace international tourists, both in terms of numbers and the types of activities that international tourists do. But I can report that in January, our Queensland.com website had 622,000 visitors, its highest number of visitors in 2 years. Finally, before I hand over to our other speakers, I'd just like to congratulate Brisbane-based company Allume. Their team have done just a fantastic job getting those at-home tests up, running, certified in the US, manufactured, and now their more than $300 million contract to supply the US market will see this, what was a small Brisbane-based company, research company, then a manufacturer, then an exporter, will now have a massive new manufacturing presence in the United States. And I want to congratulate them and just say how proud Queenslanders and the Queensland government are of their achievements.
Yesterday was a very important day for our industry. We opened our markets to all of Sydney again. It's $1 billion market for Queensland. All Sydney-siders are welcome in Brisbane again and in the rest of the state, and that is good news for us. Destinations like the Gold Coast, like Cairns, and everything in between will benefit from having more domestic visitors. This is particularly important when the international borders remain shut, affecting businesses throughout the state. Some of them will struggle over the next 12 months to stay afloat with the international borders closed probably for the rest of the year to most destinations. That means we have to work very hard with both government, state and federal, to support those businesses that need to be in place to do what they do best, and that is to support Queensland jobs. We have an enormous workforce in the tourism industry in Queensland, and we have to make sure that those jobs, those skills stay in place to be part of the recovery when that recovery comes. We do appeal to both the Queensland and the federal government to continue their support. For the federal government, post-JobKeeper, post-March, we need some targeted support for those businesses that will continue to be affected by the international border closures. And that is a very important appeal we make to the federal government. Of course, we also see certainty return to the domestic market. As I said, yesterday was an important step, but it will take some time to rebuild consumer confidence when we see what's happened in WA over the weekend. Those kind of developments, those cases and the shutdowns that occur are quite devastating for the industry, and they shake consumer confidence. So the more we can limit those responses to targeted hotspot responses and avoid wholesale border closures, the more we are able to rebuild consumer confidence, which is what's at stake now. Thank you.
Just want to add my thanks to the Deputy Premier for being here today. It really marks a tremendous milestone in the rollout of the SPIT master plan. So this is the next significant piece of that. It's very much being driven by and guided by public, as has been every step before it. The next thing that you'll see after the finalisation of this work is the construction of a ferry-capable jetty in the top of the Marine Stadium, not far from here. And so there's a lot more to be done, driven by the community, led by the government to provide what the community has asked for in this fantastic spot at the top of the Spit. So welcome to the public as they come into this new facility. As the Deputy Premier said, it's one of the most photographed spots or views down that beach with the classic view of the high rise in the distance. Thank you.
We're open to take questions.
Deputy Premier, are you sure that there's going to be consumer confidence in people from interstate to come back after the border closures, given the school holidays are still a little while away, and as Mr. Bushman was just saying, it was killed during the border closures?
Look, nobody can predict the future, and none of us knows what will happen throughout this final stage of what we hope will be the final stage of the COVID-19 pandemic. But it is heartening to see that level of interest. Really, though, our tourism industry won't be out of the woods until international visitors can return, and of course, that is still some time away.
Deputy Premier, I think it's probably fair to say that this upgrade will be well received by the public. Can you tell me where perhaps some of those bigger ticket items for the SPIT might be placed? When might you look at the cruise ship terminal, that piazza that we're looking at, down at the southern end of the SPIT?
Did you want to add a better place?
There certainly is a lot of work looking at the areas of the Spit which can be provided to industry to develop it in line with the kind of look and feel, the kind of use that we've been planning for the Spit. With regard to the cruise ship terminal, that's outside the scope of the SPIT master plan implementation.
I guess that's probably one for the Deputy Premier. Theoretically, where does a cruise ship terminal sit you guys at the moment?
Oh, look, we're focused on delivering the master plan and this stage of the master plan. Obviously, future decisions will be made down the track.
Deputy Premier, after the Police Commissioner's comments that her department will draft solutions to give to the state government on youth crime, the Queensland Council for Civil Liberties said that's a fundamentally wrong approach to take on the issue of bail and sentencing laws. What's your response to that?
Oh, look, we take advice from all sorts of people. Obviously, our police, as the front line, people on the ground, have feedback and advice. Of course, we also listen to other advisors, other parts of government and other stakeholders like who you've just quoted there. I don't think there's anything inappropriate about that.
The Queensland Police Union President Ian Levy's
Including the Queensland Police Union, yeah.
Yeah, and so what's your response to his recommendations then?
Well, again, we'll take all of those things on board. I don't think this is ever going to be a set and forget kind of policy area. It will need to be constantly evolving and constantly improving. That's what we've been doing, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Does the government support a national summit?
That would be a matter for the relevant ministers to consider, but I imagine that we would be happy to participate in something like that if there was interest from other states.
The government has looked in the past at car engine immobilisers. Is that an idea that you would revisit?
Oh, look, I think that's certainly something that needs to be considered. I think the technology needs to be constantly monitored, and when it's at a point where it is viable, where it's feasible, we should consider it, yes.
What about if it was being forced to wear ankle bracelets?
Oh, look, I think there are, again, a lot of issues associated with that would need to be taken into account, but if people want to bring ideas forward, we'll consider them.
Mr. Lever's made some comments about juvenile offenders being predominantly Indigenous. What's your response to that?
Well, I think that highlights how we can't view any of these problems through the prism of one single policy area. Like, this isn't just a question about how courts deal with bail. These are questions of intergenerational disadvantage and the impact that that's had on sections of our community, and all of those things need to be taken into account. So we need to look at the child safety system, the juvenile justice system, the education system, the health system, in fact everything that we do in our community, rather than just focus in on these individual crunch points by themselves.
So do you agree the government needs to do more work in all of those areas?
I don't think anyone would argue that we have closed the gap or fully addressed questions of Indigenous disadvantage. So no, of course there is always more to do, and we're always working at it.
And on Youth Justice last week, the Premier said that she wants to know why the courts let the young man in the Alexandra Hills case out of remand. Now, is it not correct that the courts enforce legislation which the Premier signs off on?
Well, no, the Parliament passes legislation, but what the Premier was indicating there was that we cannot go into the details of these individual cases, and that in that case, she wanted to know what matters were considered. We obviously are able to have some of that information, but we're not able always to disclose it all publicly, and that makes it very difficult to discuss individual cases.
But the courts enforce legislation which she understands and signs off on. So for her to say that she wants answers as to why a court let him out, do you understand that is confusing to some people?
Well, no, I think people understand that when courts consider matters, they have a wide range of matters that they have to take into account. And all the Premier was saying was that she wanted to understand how the courts reached that conclusion.
They're legally bound by the legislation. So
Oh, yeah, but every case before them has different facts, and they are the facts that that court considers. So they apply the legislation to a set of facts, and her remarks simply went to how those facts had been considered in that circumstance, what the facts of that case were.
With regards to the legislation, though, if the buck doesn't stop with the Premier, who does it stop with?
Well, in this case, the courts make a decision based on the law and the facts of the case.
About vacancy rates here on the Gold Coast, extremely low, less than 1% at the moment. Do you think that the housing supply here is adequate to support the growing population here on the Gold Coast?
Look, housing supply is largely a matter for the Gold Coast City Council, although of course we work with them to ensure that there is sufficient land supply. We released a report late last year which indicated that there was sufficient supply on the Gold Coast. We are seeing a surge in migration to Queensland, and that is having an impact on prices and availability, and that's something we'll need to very closely monitor going forward.
Would the government consider spending more than the $63 million that it allocated to social housing as outlined in the last budget?
So we're in the middle of a massive surge, a massive increase in social housing, the biggest increase since the Second World War. That takes time to ramp up, but it's underway right now.
So you would consider spending more?
We're certainly intending to spend more. Yes.
Just on the
You
subject,
mentioned the Loom earlier. Congratulated them for their US stuff. The government spent some money supporting them to get that up and running, but given now they've sold the product to the US, they haven't even applied to have it used in Australia. Do you think it was money well spent?
Yes, very much so. This is a company, an initiative creating jobs here in Queensland right now. There are Queenslanders working at a loom who wouldn't be there if it weren't for that ingenuity, that product, and our support for them. This is something we should all be very, very proud about. The fact that a Queensland product is the fact that the United States has turned to a Queensland product to be a key weapon in their attempts to control COVID-19.
but in allocating taxpayer money, did you envisage at the time that the product would be mainly used overseas?
Yeah, this has always been a product that would have most application in places where they were struggling with a massive outbreak. We are very fortunate not to have that here, and so we can rely on other technologies. So we don't we don't need that product right now. Maybe down the track that'll change, and maybe down the track that our TGA will consider a testing kit like this one. It's been given emergency approval in the US because of just how drastic their circumstances are, and I understand that the company currently envisages that they will only be able to service that market, such the demand is so strong.
We're hearing that Spelum is going to look to build or run a factory over in the US. What happens with those jobs that were spruiking here in Queensland back in December?
So they'll continue to manufacture here in Queensland, as well as at the new facility they plan to build in the United States. So it's a massive expansion for them, but their headquarters and their Brisbane-based manufacturing staff will remain here and will continue to manufacture and export products.
So you still believe this money will spend?
Oh, very much so. I was very pleased to help them ship their first set of these tests, and that's obviously been so successful. Now they've got this massive new order.
What do you say to critics who say, look, it's a bit rich for the Queensland government to be appealing for an extension of JobKeeper when tourism operators are suffering as a result of your government's border closures?
Well, no, they're suffering as a result of a global pandemic. We didn't invent this pandemic. We have been working to get it under control, but the international border restrictions were put in place by the Morrison government. Of course, we support them. They've been very, very useful in controlling the virus. But the national government has to take ongoing responsibility for supporting jobs and industries throughout that. As are we. We're doing our part, and so should they.
Do you have any update on the report or investigation into the hotel quarantine we were told last week that would be released last week?
No, I'm not sure where that's at, but I'm happy to find out for you.
So just quickly back on the loom, did you have any guarantees from the company that it won't ship those jobs overseas?
They're very, very proud Queenslanders. I don't think they've got any intention of moving overseas, but they are expanding just so rapidly that part of their deal with the US is to put some of their growth in manufacturing on site in the US, and I think that makes sense.
But is that just verbal? That they winked and they nudged you? You said we're going to stay here in Queensland, and you got some contractual?
Well, I'm not going to get into the details of those contracts, but I can tell you that in general, they usually include clauses that require companies to meet targets and sustain those targets in terms of employment over time.
And just one more. You said yesterday that there were some failures with the justice system, and there were some tragedies that you regret. Are there any other incidents other than the Alexandra Hills case that you were referring to?
Well, look, I have to be careful in referring to individual cases, and that's why I've avoided doing that at any point in time. But what I've said, and what the Premier said, others have said, is that we will take advice as we have throughout the term of our government. We'll take advice, and if we can improve the system where we can, we'll do that.
And if criminals are being let out and you're not happy with them being let out, do you yourself and the Premier not need to look back at the legislation?
Oh, look, clearly that may include needing to change the law.
Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, yes.
Not about these topics. Many tourism operators across the state are extremely concerned. There are already jobs disappearing this week in anticipation of the cliff, and the cliff is here now for some operators. They have to make staff arrangements now if JobKeeper indeed stops. It will stop, the federal government tells us, but they have certainly put out a sense that there may be some targeted support for tourism operators, which is what we've been asking for nationally across all states. This is not just a Queensland problem. We want the tourism industry to be sustainable beyond March, and for some operators that will mean they need state and federal support.
What regions are you most concerned about?
Well, those regions that have a high exposure to international tourism, North Queensland, of course, they're really suffering. It's diabolically bad up there for many operators whose business has shrunk by 90% in some cases, and they will have to make some pretty major decisions. The concern for us is that losing that capacity, that business capacity, and the staff and the skills that go with it will make it very difficult to ramp up when the consumer demand comes back from international visitors and domestic visitors. And that applies to the Gold Coast, it applies to Brisbane. Here there is more of a domestic market that can replace some of the gaps, but it's not enough. It's not enough to make up for the overall losses of international border closures and lack of consumer confidence domestically.
What do you make of this particular upgrade in terms of a tourist draw card for the Gold Coast?
Well, the Gold Coast is one of our most iconic destinations, of course. It is the quintessential holiday destination for Australians. It has reinvented itself many times, and if there is any silver lining to the pandemic, it is that more Australians have refocused on the domestic product. They're rediscovering what there is, and they're rediscovering the new attractions that have been built into destinations like the Gold Coast. And the Spit is an iconic place. I've been told this morning it's the most Instagrammed location on the Gold Coast. So to have it upgraded and have facilities provided that will make it more of an enjoyable experience is absolutely terrific.
How long do you think it'll take for consumer confidence to return from like interstate following the state border closures?
Well, we're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. It seems tragically what happened in WA is not helping with consumer confidence, and many consumers, many visitors or would-be visitors are certainly now more concerned than they ever have been about making that booking, making those plans, and it will take some time. We have February, March ahead when there's generally lower domestic travel. That will be a tough period for many operators, including here on the Gold Coast. Easter is the next bright spot, and we hope by then we will be able, by demonstration that the borders will stay open until then, we will demonstrate that it's safe to travel again, it's safe to make that booking, and that's certainly what we're looking for.
Guys, the rain's going to come across around. Just tell us on how are Easter bookings looking?
The bookings have been strong. We've seen in Brisbane, we've seen airport aviation traffic, passenger numbers almost increased tenfold this week already in response to yesterday. And certainly on the Gold Coast and also in Cairns, it's looking much stronger. And the online booking engines reporting a huge spike from interest from Sydney.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay guys, we're going to head out to the end and get some overlay if you want to come out. I'll just get the cameras in front, if that's okay.